Okay, kia ora tātou and welcome to our webinar tonight. My name is Vicky Hargraves and I'll be running the webinar tonight. I am standing in for Nina, who normally likes to welcome you. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us this evening. If you haven't already done so, please make sure that you do have a look at our online library of resources. We're an organisation trying to bridge that gap between research and practice, so we really encourage you to browse through our resources. We're trying to make research accessible, practical information available to teachers. The webinar tonight is going to run for about 40 to 45 minutes, and partway through we'll be opening up to questions using the chat function. You should have a little button either at the top or the bottom of your screen that says chat. We're also going to be recording the webinar, and that will be available up on our website in the next couple of days. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our special guest speaker for tonight. We are looking at how literacy can be fostered in early childhood settings, and we've invited Professor Claire McLachlan, to join us tonight. Professor Claire McLachlan is the Dean of the School of Education at Federation University Australia. Prior to this, she was Head of School for Te Whariki, the School of Curriculum and Pedagogy in the Faculty of Education at the University of Waikato. And she's also been a Professor of Childhood Education at Massey University and taught courses on languages, literacies, cognition, pedagogy, assessment, evaluation and research methods. Claire has published 9 books, with the 10th book in preparation, and her primary field of research is early childhood education. And she's really focused around literacy, physical activity, curriculum, pedagogy, assessment and evaluation. Claire was also a member of the writing team for the revision of Te Whariki and has been on the reference groups for the strategic plan and the early learning action plan. So she brings a wealth of experience to our discussion tonight. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you very much, Vicky. And tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. It's really lovely to be with you tonight, and thank you for turning up at 8 o'clock at night.
Okay, well, let's get started. We're talking about literacy tonight. So let's get started with the definition of literacy. What is early literacy, and why is it so important for children to develop the sort of foundation of early literacy skills at this early childhood period? Okay,
thanks, Vicky. Actually, I think really it's useful to think about literacy as a kind of a nature-nurture issue. All children are born with the, well, most children are born with the potential to develop literacy, but it's the interaction with the environment that really supports the literacy development. So we need both things going on, if you like, supportive development and also a supportive environment. There's two really strong parts to the research. Some of it kind of comes from neuroscience. So we talk about it as a socio-psycholinguistic perspective. So that's the sort of hard science evidence, if you like, around what's important. And the other research is a social practice perspective. So it talks about all of the things that happen in children's homes, in their early childhood settings, and in their wider communities that influence what children learn about literacy. So in the social practice perspective, we talk about the funds of knowledge that children bring to their literacy learning, and that's an idea that I think most of you will be familiar with. Now, what we know, so coming back to the issue of why it's important, is that we know that children learn an enormous amount about literacy, usually before they get to school. And the primary school service build on that knowledge. So if children come in with really limited experiences, children have an awful lot of learning to do. So it is quite important that they have rich learning experiences before they get to primary school. And one of the reasons for this is we know that there's a notion of Matthew effects in operation. And Matthew effects stem from the gospel according to St. Matthew, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this is what happens in literacy, that for children who have had really rich experiences before they get to primary schooling, they usually develop the ability to read and write without difficulty. And for those who haven't had those experiences or have some learning difficulties perhaps, they struggle to learn. And what happens is the gap gets wider and wider between those two groups of children. And so the effects of what children learn in early childhood have very long lasting effects, usually right through to at the age of about 10. So we know that, that what happens in early childhood is terribly important, and that it lays, we talk about foundational knowledge and skills, and really that's what it is. It's laying a very rich foundation for the things that will come later. So this isn't about preparing children for school, and I want to be really clear about this. This is about preparing children for life, because we know that there will be really long consequences if children struggle in that first year after school, after they start school. And the research is really clear that early childhood teachers can play an enormous role in helping those children who may not come from homes of advantage where they've had lots of experiences. So I think that's the real thing, is that we're offering rich learning experiences which lay this very important foundation. And the key part to that, as most of you will be aware, is about oral language. So I can't stress enough how important oral language is in this discussion. Good enough, Vicky?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the skills, the foundation of skills that would be desirable for children to be going to school with, rich oral language, or great vocabularies and ability with the language. Is there anything else that kind of falls under that umbrella of early literacy skills?
Yeah, there are a set of predictors of which things count. So the first group of those, and I'll read them to you so that I don't get them wrong. The information for this comes from a thing called the National Early Literacy Panel Report that came out in 2008, and it's a really excellent review of all of the studies that show what makes a difference to children's learning. So the key predictors are knowledge of the alphabet, phonological awareness, which is the awareness of sounds and words, the ability to rapidly name letters, numbers, objects, and colours, the ability to write their own name, and the ability to remember spoken information and memory for a short period of time. So just being able to hold, a sound or a word in your head for a period of time is very important. There's some other things which are highly correlated but not absolute predictors, and these are the print conventions and symbols, so knowing what letters look like and that the black bits on the page are the words, a strong oral language base, and a rich vocabulary, particularly of unusual words, so that children, when they do get to school, actually are able to comprehend what's being said to them. So that the oral language and the vocabulary are important because they support listening comprehension, in early childhood and in primary. And the last one is the ability to match and to discriminate visual symbols. So this applies to maths actually as equally as it does to literacy. So it's being able to recognise what numbers are as well. So that experience that children have of being able to recognise print in the environment is terribly important. Now, why all of this is important is that together the knowledge of the alphabet and the awareness of sounds and words helps children learn what's known as the alphabetic principle. Now, the alphabetic principle is the ability to recognise that the sounds that you're hearing, you can also see in print. And this helps you later when you're reading or decoding, and it also helps you with encoding or with spelling. And we know that children in early childhood are already often making attempts at spelling words. And what they usually do is they leave out all of the vowels and they just put the consonant sounds in that they can hear. But these are real attempts at spelling. And so when you see children making these attempts at spelling that are using consonants but leaving the rest out, you should jump for joy, because actually it tells you that that child has phonological awareness and that they can hear the sounds and that they understand that that sound can be represented in those letters. So it is magical. Just
phenomenal
magical.
achievement.
It really is. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's absolutely lovely. So I think it's those sorts of things that you want to understand, that the children in early childhood are putting all of these understandings together, and that's what's foundational, and a primary teacher can build on that. But if they haven't got that, there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Okay, so how can early literacy be fostered and encouraged?
I think I like a quote that came from Stuart McNaughton in 2002. And I can't remember which book it came from now. Stuart McNaughton's our Chief Science Advisor for Education. And he said that the curriculum must be wide enough to incorporate the familiar while unlocking the unfamiliar. And I absolutely love this quote, because I think that's the key thing, isn't it, that early childhood teachers can provide. So going back to that notion of funds of knowledge, children are going to come into the centre with a range of different experiences, and those experiences will be individual, they'll be social, they'll be familial, they'll be cultural, you know, and they'll look different. You know, so not all children will have had exactly the same experiences. So you need to find out, if you like, what it is that children have done before they come into the, as they come into the centre, so that you can provide that range of experiences of the stuff that's unfamiliar, because that's going to be the richness that they have, that you don't disregard anything they've learned at home, because that's fabulous. But you also build in these opportunities to learn some other new sorts of things. So I guess that's probably, you know, the fundamental part of it, is that you are working with the familiar and the unfamiliar, and that you find that out. One of the ways you can do that is, a lot of centres use a profile as the child enters the centre, and those could be things that you ask parents about. You know, we're really interested in supporting their language and their literacy abilities. What are some of the things that you do at home that might be really nice for them to do here, and for us to be able to share with you the things that we do in the centre? So I think this notion of reciprocity in terms of literacy activities between the home and the centre is an important, a really important thing to do. And we know that the literacy activities in the home will be very, very different. There's a lovely study that was done actually with primary school age children, not early childhood, with Samoan communities, which showed that in the Samoan homes that were part of the study, it wasn't the parents that were necessarily supporting children's literacy, it was older brothers and sisters. And that some of the literacy activities that children were involved in were related to church, and to, you know, being able to recite prayers and all sorts of things on a Sunday. So, you know, it would be useful to know that. What does literacy look like in your home? One of the things I've done in some research that I did with Ruahine Kindergarten Association is that we sent a survey home to parents to ask them, so that we knew what was going on in the home. And one of the things we discovered in that study is that parents had far more access to digital devices than we had anticipated. So we started sending home newsletters with links to good books that were online, to nice activities that children could use, so that we could increase the literacy opportunities in that home, because they had access to digital devices and they could do things with their children that way. So I guess, you know, do some digging and find out what does happen in that home. The other thing I think that it's useful to think about, and I wrote about this in the piece that I wrote recently on this topic for the Education Hub, is this notion of constrained and unconstrained skills. And I think this is a really valuable thing for teachers to be thinking about. The research comes from Catherine Snow, who is my guru. I love Catherine Snow's work. She's written brilliantly around bilingualism in early childhood too, actually. And so what she says is that constrained skills are things like knowledge of the alphabet. And they're constrained in the sense that they're finite. You know, there are 26 letters of the alphabet, and children will learn these quite easily. There is also, there's rules for words, so that there are word families that children can learn, that block and clock and rock all rhyme, they all belong to the same family. So those things are finite. And so you can happily teach those to children, but it's not enough. So she also argues that children need to develop unconstrained skills, and these are limitless. Unconstrained skills are learnt throughout life. I'm sure when I wrote my PhD, I learned way more vocabulary than I'd ever had. But she says that vocabulary learning is a key part of the unconstrained, that you give children rich experiences and then you attach language to those experiences. And that's the bit that helps to prepare them for the comprehension that's going to come, so that when they're listening to a story, they know that word, they know what that word means. And so it's that enrichment. So centres that just focus on teaching alphabet actually are kind of missing the point. There's a lot more that is involved for children. So, I'd really encourage people to think about vocabulary as a key thing. The other thing I thought I'd talk to you about is Catherine Snow. So Catherine with a C, and Snow like the white stuff they have in Dunedin at the moment. Yeah, brilliant. Read Catherine Snow. Absolutely love her. The other the other idea that I want you to think about in the early childhood setting is around structure and process. So structure is about how you set up literacy in the curriculum. That's literally what it looks like, that you can walk through the door and you can see the literacy opportunities in that environment. When I did my doctorate, I did exactly that. I recorded every single thing that was on the walls in the kindergartens in which I did my doctorate. So I could see the structure that was in place, and I could see the planning that was in place for literacy as well, because the two go hand in hand. And the other side of it is the process. So the process is the pedagogies that you're going to use in order to support, that planning that you've put in place. You can link this really clearly to Vygotsky's ideas around access and mediation, that children need access to a literacy environment, and they also need somebody to mediate for them. Vygotsky argued that if children only have access, they're limited to maturation. They're not going to develop other ideas or develop, more skills because they've had nobody unpack it for them. So the big role for the early childhood teacher is to set up this beautiful environment and then to get in amongst it with children and help them to see, what that environment has to offer them. We bandy around the notion of affordances, and how environments afford different things to children. We know from perceptual theory that it doesn't if you haven't shown children, and it doesn't have to be you, it could be other children that show children how to use the beautiful resources that you've put there. And so there's a few ideas. So the world according to Claire, I think there's a few things teachers need to know. So I think you need to know what the predictors of reading achievement are, and to recognise when you see them happening, because you do see them happening. As I said, you'll see children attempting to write. You'll hear them telling, acting out in dramatic play a story that you've read to them. You can see and you can hear this in action. You also need to know about children's ability with language and in which language. Because, we have, in New Zealand and in Australia, enormous numbers of children who are bilingual and multilingual. And you actually need to know how they're getting on in their first language. Coming back to the beautiful Catherine Snow, she says that if children are not stable users of their first language, they become unstable users of the second language and the first language. So you've actually got to, you've got to encourage the home language and build on it to support them with understandings of English. And I can give you an example about that a bit later if you'd like. You need to give opportunities to enhance literacy. So look around your centre and think about what's there. what's interesting. I can remember years ago going into a very beautiful centre that shall remain nameless, where there were really lovely French crayons, but the French crayons were in a shelf way up here, and the children couldn't get at them. They were only allowed to come down on special occasions. And I thought, well, that was ridiculous. You were better to buy some cheaper Crayola ones and put them at, put them at a level where children could get to them. So think about, come down to child level. What is available to them? What does it look like? And how easily can they access it? I've talked previously about the literacy experiences at home and how you can build on those, but also you can send home suggestions to homes about the things that you've been doing in the centre, and they might like to do it at home as well. So think about this two-way communication around literacy with the families. And the last one is about literacy resources. And there's a wonderful researcher at Stanford University called Anne Cunningham, who's also one of my gurus, and she talks about knowledge calibration. And knowledge calibration is knowing how children develop and knowing which resources you should pick to support children's development, and then which pedagogies you should use in order to help children to learn from that resource. And so this is really important, because what tends to happen is that coming from a good place, coming from good intention, people sometimes use the wrong resources with children. And in New Zealand, there is an ERO review on literacy, which I helped ERO to design the parameters of what they looked like. It was a really interesting project. But one of the things that came out of that, which has always terrified me, is that they found evidence of people using phonics packages with 2-year-olds. Now, there's no point in using a phonics package with a 2-year-old, because children's phonological awareness is not well enough developed in order to be able to respond to that resource. So although I actually don't have problems with the use of a phonics package in the junior primary school if children are having problems with phonological awareness, you don't use it with a 2-year-old, and there is no pedagogy you could use that would make that work. So I guess that's the thing. What's the match? What's the child's developmental level? What are the resources you're using, and what are the pedagogies that you're going to use to bring that whole thing together so that it's a really rich and enjoyable learning experience for the child?
Thank you, Claire.
Sorry, I talk too much, don't I?
No, that's a wealth of information. Thank you. I just want to invite our audience tonight, if they want to start typing in some questions in the chat function, and I'll do my best to field those questions and pose them to Claire. But I wanted to come back to something you said, Claire, about children's progression and sort of understanding their different sort of stages, I suppose, of literacy learning. And because we have the communication strand of Te Whariki, but it isn't incredibly explicit about sort of the different literacy outcomes that we should be looking for. And I know there are literacy learning progressions that are used in school. Could you talk to us a little bit about those?
Sure. So I'll start with the last point, which is around the literacy learning progressions, because I've never been certain how aware early childhood teachers are of that resource. So you can find this if you just type literacy learning progressions New Zealand into Mr. Google. This document will pop up. And what it has is it is a set of literacy progressions from school entry to the end of year 8. And that's quite valuable, because it tells you what it is that the primary school will be looking for in terms of children's knowledge, skills, abilities, dispositions when they enter the primary school. Now they have a set for new entrants, and what they're looking for, and basically when the child enters and in the first 6 months. So I would go and have a look at that list, and what you'll find in there, which I think is really neat, is that it does include the constrained skills of things like alphabet knowledge, which is important, as I've talked to you about before, but it also has the a lot of the unconstrained skills. So it's got things like recognizing their own name when they see it in print, being able to talk about the past, the present, and the future, being able to tell or retell a story, So these are the things that we would expect children who come out of early childhood confident and competent to be able to do, that somebody says, so did you have a good weekend, or did you have a good holiday? What did you do on your holiday? That they could respond to that. So, you know, do have a look at that list, because I think when you see that, you'll go, oh, okay, I can actually provide children with the types of experiences in early childhood that will make that familiar when they go into the primary school. Now, I think you've had another session on transition to school, perhaps, that Sally Peters ran. So,
yes, did, yeah.
And Sally, who I'm, you know, has been a colleague and a friend, will talk to you about the importance of continuity. Now, some of the continuity is about familiarity of activities. So, you know, you want some familiar things that children can do, like tell a story to somebody. So have a look at that. Coming back to the ideas of looking at progression, I think that it's important that you have a look at the learning outcomes in the communication strand in Te Whariki, which I know intimately well. We spent a lot of time with them, and that you think about the types of methods of data collection that you would use to record progress for children. Now, one of the things you have to be aware of when it comes to literacy, and I mentioned this briefly before, is that children's literacy development is on a continuum. So just because they're 3, they don't all behave the same way, and they don't all have the same knowledge and skills. So you will have a 3-year-old whose literacy knowledge and skills are, you know, at a 5, 6, 7-year-old level, and you'll equally have 5-year-olds who have literacy knowledge and skills at a 2-year-old level. So what you have to do is to have your antenna up, actually, to be looking out for where children are on that continuum. Now, some of this you'll be able to do spontaneously. You know, you'll see it and you can write it down and go, wow, I saw them, you know, writing a letter to their grandmother today, and I could recognize the letters and I could recognize some of the words in that, you know, so that would be nice. I'd take a photo of that writing immediately and collect it. Some of it may be things that you hear, like I can remember my daughter Jessica, who's probably online, has 2 children who are now 7 and 9. When they were 3 and 5, Millie, my granddaughter, had just started school, and she came home with this laminated sheet, which was the letters of the alphabet. And she was busy telling me, you know, which letters of the alphabet that she knew. And she got to 8, and she got to H, sorry, and she paused, and this little voice beside me said H. And then she carried on, and she got to Y, and she paused again, and the little 3-year-old voice next to me said Y. So he knew that, you know, although he wasn't particularly verbal at 3, he knew the alphabet already. So I think you have to have, you know, have your radar out to be detecting these things. I like the idea of a digital portfolio for literacy, because I think that way you can collect audio, you can collect video, you can collect photographs of artifacts, and you can revisit these, I don't know, perhaps every 3 to 6 months, and go, what have I got in my collection? You know, what do I know about how this child's getting on against those the learning outcomes in the communication strand? So I guess I would approach progression from both a spontaneous data collection to a planned data collection. And if I found that I didn't have any information about that child, I would actively go and seek it. And I would start following that child around to see what I could see was happening. Because if nothing was happening, that's cause for concern, isn't it? If you're not seeing anything happening, you actually need to be worried.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Lots of questions coming through then. I guess teachers are thinking a little bit about the practices and processes that they can be using. And someone's asking your opinion on whether using a scheme such as Letterland or Jolly Phonics to teach about letters and letter sounds and phonological awareness would be a good idea, or is it better to have a rich oral and written language context? What's your opinion there?
I'm not terribly keen on commercial packages.
Okay.
And I do think that there's the risk of using something like Letterland and Jolly Phonics badly. And the problem with it is that, you know, coming back to the notion that children are all at different levels of development, if you're focusing on, you know, on a certain phoneme, it may be that some children actually already know that phoneme, so your teaching is a waste of time, or that others, you know, are not yet hearing phonemes and words. Remember that they go from words to syllables to onsets and rhymes to phonemes. So phoneme awareness is a very long way down the track. So, you know, using something like you know, Letterland or Jolly Phonics, it could be a bad misfire. You know, I think you'd be better off to use, you know, there's two different types of story reading, which I didn't mention. So, you know, you can use books where you do print referencing, where you're literally focusing on the print and, you know, emphasizing aspects of print. Or you can use a dialogical style of reading where you're questioning, you're explaining new words, you know, you're adding to vocabulary, etc. So it probably makes far more sense if you're looking for helping to teach phonological awareness, which is that awareness of words, of syllables, of onsets, of rhymes. So the beginning sound, the ending sound, and down to phonemes, that you pick books that are really good for that. And there's some brilliant books that are full of rhyme and rhythm that help children. So, you know, I'm a heavy advocate of story reading, and I do get concerned that maybe story reading isn't happening perhaps you know, with individual children. I mean, yeah, I would do individual, small group, large group story reading, but make really good choices about the books that you read, and then you won't need the phonics packages in order to teach it.
Yeah, thank you. We also have some questions around mat time and this idea that you know, our story is important, is story reading important, and collaborative story reading where you get children to join in with parts of the story, and also songs and rhymes. Presumably they're all, you know, teachers are on the right track with those.
Absolutely. I don't know if many of you know the books of Mem Fox, the Australian author, but Mem Fox says that there's 3 readings in any story. She said the first one is you read to, the second reading you read with, and the third reading the children read to you. And I think this, I saw her do this with a conference audience with 500 people in it. And so she had 500 people reading the story back to her. It's just brilliant. But I think it's worthwhile thinking about that. Years ago when I was doing my doctorate, I saw a kindergarten use the story Mr. Gumpy's Outing. Is that the name of the book?
Yeah.
And so they read the book to the children on the Monday. And on the Tuesday, they read it again, and they got into this very deep, meaningful conversation with the children about this. And they said to the children, you know, would we like to do a play of Mr. Gumpy's Outing and show it to our families? And the children thought this was a great idea. So by Wednesday, they were building boats and doing all sorts of things and assigning people to roles and giving them the words that they needed to speak. And on the Thursday at the mat session, they were practicing their play. And on the Friday, the parents came in and the children did the play of Mr. Gumpy's Outing. And I've never forgotten it because it was so incredibly rich. And it was a planned activity, but it was absolutely gorgeous. And the children were all involved in some way, and so it gave them, you know, it gave them story reading, it gave them you know, abilities to stand up and talk in front of a group. It taught them, you know, how to conduct plays. Lovely learning. So yeah, yes to story reading.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, what about if children have rich literacy experiences? Teachers know that the child has lots of rich literacy experience, but they're still having problems with phonological awareness and alphabet sound correspondence.
Yep, I know this one well. Actually, this is why I got interested in this in the first place, because my middle boy, when he started school, had enormous difficulties learning to read. And when he did his NET test at 6, the concepts about print test, you know, the clay tests that they do when they're 6 years of age, they turned out that he had excellent alphabet knowledge, that he had excellent knowledge of vocabulary, and his phonological awareness was appalling. And, you know, he'd had the same experiences that my other 2 children had had. So what I had to do with him actually once he was at primary school was I used, with the help of, we were in the United States at the time, with the help of his teacher in the evenings, I used to use phonics flashcards with him so that he could learn that, you know, that the letter G could be used for giant and it could be used for gate, you know, because this is one of the issues is you've got this strange letter that's actually got 2 phonemes attached to it. So I wouldn't be worried so much about the letter grapheme correspondence, so that, you know, the letter print correspondence in early childhood, but I would be wanting to make sure that children could recognise that different letters have different sounds. You know, and this, you know, I've seen this done for years with people where, you know, you've got letter cards or whatever, and you say, all right, we're sending you off the mat to you, you know, with the sound P. So this is what the letter P looks like, and the sound is P. So whose name starts with P? You know, and so these things, although they seem maybe a little contrived, are actually really helpful because they help children to understand that there's the letter and there's the sound that goes with it. And there are some letters which are really annoying, you know, that we have K and we have C, and they can both make, you know, different sound, you know, the same sorts of sounds. So it is something which you can do quite deliberately through, you know, things that you do on the mat, or by emphasizing the, you know, the phonemes and story reading. It's a, you know, a nice thing to do. Or you can do it through nursery rhymes. You know, nursery rhymes are brilliant. There is this lovely old piece of research now that says that knowledge of the nursery rhymes at 3 predicts beginning reading achievement at the age of 5, and predicts comprehension by the age of 8. So, you know, there is some very, very strong evidence for including nursery rhymes. But you can make up your own rhymes, you know, if you don't like the words of the nursery rhymes, then make up rhymes with children. You know, that can be fun too, although getting children to predict rhyming words is phonologically quite hard. So you just have to make sure you put a lot of support in for those sorts of things.
Isn't it fascinating that the nursery rhymes that we've been using for centuries, actually, without research, without knowing how important it might be? Yeah. Claire, what happens if someone has a strong foreign accent? Does that hinder children's ability to grasp phonological awareness?
No.
No.
Because, you know, children, you know, when you live in a multicultural, multilingual society, everybody has an accent. So if you're reading to the child in English, you know, children are very flexible, and they will adapt to the sound of that, the sound of how that person speaks, won't they? You know, so no, I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay,
and it's a richness, isn't it? And it's important also to introduce children to other languages, because we know they learn those easily when they're young.
Thank you. That's reassuring. I want to turn now to an issue that you alerted us to at the beginning, was about bilingualism and how many children are growing up with 1, 2 or 3 languages at home. Lots of questions coming through about that. So yes, how you said you did have an example that you could talk further through. I thought maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, so when I did some research with Ruahine Kindergarten Association going back probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, which is around collaborative planned reviews of literacy in the kindergartens. And so I did this research with my colleague Alison Arrow and with Judy Watson, who's now with Te Whariki Maiaha. And what we did is we worked with the teachers to help them to do an audit of what they were doing in the centre. And then we also we had a set of literacy activities that we did with children, which helped us to analyse where children were at in terms of their literacy. And one of the things we did was a vocabulary test, and we used the British Picture vocabulary test to do this. And so we had a little girl who had recently come from India, and although this was a very low SES kindergarten, the father was a PhD student at Massey, and the child came out not speaking really a word of English. But it was obvious to me when I did the other tests of alphabet knowledge and of phonemic awareness that this child had quite strong emergent literacy skills, but her vocabulary in English was very, very low. So an average score is 100. She scored 55 the first time we did it. So it was quite low. And we repeated those activities and the vocab test in the middle of the year, and she had come up to around the 80 odd mark, 100 being average or normal. And then by the end of the year, when we went back and did that child's emergent literacy skills were off the chart. You know, she was really clever in terms of phonological awareness, and her vocabulary score was somewhere over 120. So she had developed in that kindergarten environment, although she came in with strong emergent literacy skills in her own language, which I think the language was Urdu, and she had built English on top of it. So it can be quite phenomenal. So that's why I said to you earlier, you know, don't tell the parents to speak English at home. Tell them to read to her, to sing to her, to talk to the child in their own language. And then you can build English on top of that. And then what happens, if that happens well, is that you wind up with a child who becomes bilingual. Whereas if you don't do that, they wind up losing their first language and having trouble in English as well. So it's really important that you build on the foundation of the first language. And as I say, if you want more about that, read the wonderful Catherine Snow. You know, she did all the research with most of it's done in Texas and Arizona with Mexican children who've come across the border from Mexico and who are Spanish speaking.
Okay. Yes, I think that some people have commented that the parents of children are telling the children not to speak their first language in the centre, that the parents really want them to learn English. So that's one barrier that teachers are finding. And also other teachers are unsure how to support that first language, or even how to assess the competencies of children in their first language, because if you don't know the language yourself,
well, you can't. So this is something that you would ask the parents about if they were able to communicate with you, you know, well enough in English. You could ask them about, you know, are they recognising the symbols that are used in, you know, in writing in your language? Are they interested in hearing stories? You know, are they using, you know, some of the words that you hear in stories? So I would ask some questions about that rather than, you know, I haven't seen, there is some work that came out of University of Canterbury that's assessed the literacy in Samoan and in English. So there's a bit of New Zealand research, but for other languages, no, that's not a very easy thing to do. So you really have to it comes back to having conversations with families about, you know, reinforcing that child's home language is terribly important. And then secondly, asking them about what sorts of things the child's doing and what are they enjoying. And if you can't converse easily with the parent, if you're able to get somebody who can translate, it would be really useful. And I know some of the kindergartens I've worked with have used, you know, other people who are in their community for translation in order to be able to help.
That was a question that would come up as well about, you know, having teachers that can, you know, what you do if you don't have teachers that can speak the same language.
Yeah, that's
Claire,
right.
we're rapidly running out of time. I wonder if I could keep you just for 2 more questions tonight.
Sure.
Would that be okay?
That's fine.
So an interesting question I thought came up in the chat was mat time. Should it be when, you know, obviously a lot of stories and songs and rich language opportunities, teachers are asking, is that something that should sort of be a mandatory part of the day? They're concerned that if it's optional, then children might miss out. They might choose to be in the sandpit instead, and they might not be receiving those experiences.
Interesting question.
I thought so.
Yeah, I mean, it actually depends on the quality of the mat time, doesn't it? Some mat times are, you know, are really about behaviour management. I know when I was doing my PhD, I've got lots of records of mat times where teachers spend a lot of time saying, sitting on your bottoms and zipping up your lips, you know, and it was fairly difficult in that situation. So I think it depends on the size of the group, and you might be better if you've got, you know, a very, like I know there's some centres that have got 50 odd children. Well, running a mat time with 50 children is not going to be an easy or probably fun thing to do. So it might be better that you divided children into smaller groups. You know, there's no reason why you couldn't take your bunch of 3-year-olds out and sit under a tree with them and read a story with them. So I think you have to think about the context. And actually, Vicky, you and I have spoken about this at other times, you know, that sometimes the story reading happens kind of at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And if there's children who aren't there at that time, they might miss out. So you probably also need to think about, what does your day look like? And are children getting equity of opportunity for literacy as well? So it's not a question that has a black and white answer, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think, I think what I'd like to ask my final question tonight is just, what would you really like to see, the teachers that are listening tonight, what would you really like to see them go into their centres tomorrow and do in terms of supporting children's literacy? What would be the one most important thing that they could do to make a difference?
You're going to restrict me to one?
Yeah. Okay, you can have 2 if you like.
Okay. All right. So the first one is go and have a look at your book collection and make sure that you've got enough books in your collection to give children a range of opportunities, you know, so different types of books, and that you can bring out a fresh supply. So look at the size and the range of your book collection. And the second one is that you commit to reading to children every day, if you can, every single day.
Thank you. I think that's really important. Thank you for giving us those messages. Well, it's been really wonderful to have you on tonight. I'll touch base with you tomorrow, because it's a lot of questions coming up about resources and what can they go and read about bilingualism and all of this. So perhaps you and I can come up with a list and we can publish that on the Education Hub's website. Do go and check out the website, everyone, because Claire has written a guide for us on fostering early literacy, which I highly recommend. And the webinar recording will be available in the next couple of days too. So if you have anyone that's missed it tonight and you want to let them know that this information was here tonight, then they can access that on our website. So, okay, kia ora, Claire. It was so lovely having you on tonight. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Good night.